Time once again for a meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABRE. I am Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner-Waterman chapter of SABRE in Vermont. Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, before we get started, we got a few things to go over. Where's Jeff Cohen? Jeff?
Yeah, yes.
Yes. What's going on with your podcast?
Thanks. Yes, on the Baseball and BBQ podcast this past weekend, we dropped an interview with a radio personality named Robbie Zucker. He also has a great voice artist, I guess, a voice in a lot of impersonations. And he's an old friend of my broadcast partner, Len Aberman, so they reminisce a little. And on the New York State's Hall of Fame this week, well, after this meeting, interviewing, if anybody's interested in hockey, the 1980 gold medal winner Steve Januzek,
Oh,
who
wow.
who did not get into a game,
Yeah.
but he still won the gold medal, and he met his wife there. So he's thinking that's the best thing he ever did in Lake Placid.
Two gold medals right there.
There you go.
I mean, really.
It's
So
available on all your podcast apps. Thank you.
there you go. If you are not downloading that podcast every week, point your podcatcher toward both of them, Baseball and Barbecue and the New York State Hall of Fame podcast. Grab those and just get yourself entertained, especially with Baseball and Barbecue, because I mean it's baseball and food. What more could you ask for? I mean, really, right? All right. Hey, where's Megan Hanna? Megan,
Hello,
hello, my friend. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Talk to me about how our e-zine is going for our next issue. We had a little conversation before we let everybody in, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's looking great. I think we already have about 12 submissions promised for the summer issue. And I was actually toying with the idea of potentially breaking it into two separate issues, doing one like early summer and one late summer. We'll see. But for sure, we've got some great content, really great content, some research essays, or research articles, some personal essays. I think it's going to be a really, really great issue.
This has gone from the idea to incredible very quickly. And the reason it's gone that way is because of all of you guys out there who are writing and contributing to our e-zine, and for Megan signing on to do this and to really sign on to what we believe here in Northern New England with our attitude of openness and affirming everyone that comes into our meetings. So Megan, I want to thank you for taking this and doing what you're doing with it. If you want to send a submission to us, you're going to send it right to Megan. Megan, how do they send it to you?
You could send it to me via email. It's mfullerhannah@comcast.net. And we are certainly still open for submissions. I mean, I don't think we have really there's no page limit. We could make it
Nope.
as big as we wanted it to be, and or I can hold it over to for the fall issue if you need a little bit more time. I think we'll just start accepting things on a rolling basis, frankly, and we'll fit it in where we fit it in.
There you go.
So yeah, for sure, anything that you're working on that you'd like to submit. Bruce and I talked before about, in the beginning we had sort of this narrower Northern New England focus, but now I think it's really a publication by and for the people who come to these Monday meetings, and it should reflect whatever you all are interested in. So of course we love to see Northern New England content, but for sure we will read anything.
There you go. Jeff Cohen in the chat has a question for you, Megan. If it's broken up into two issues, does Gus the Saber Cat have to write two articles?
I guess he probably will. Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
I hope that's okay with him.
Thanks, Megan.
No problem.
Half a can McClanahan in the chat, so I can write about a New York Yankee. Sure, why not? Clyde Sukeforth was a Brooklyn Dodger. I mean, really. Yeah. Alec, what's going on?
Thank you. One observation: the Pacific Northwest / Southwest Canada region would probably like to contribute to your magazine. So I will try to
Awesome.
rally the troops out here. And then I guess I would say if you're messing with time and space by having two summer issues, I think I would call it a periodical, right? And it's going to be published periodically, period to be determined, right?
And that is true. Yes.
He's got a good point. That's why we had taken to calling it an e-zine because it becomes so big. So that's a good thought. So buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. Joe Ross has entered the room. Joe, are you prepared for us? Tell us your favorite entry for today in baseball history. You got one?
I am always prepared. Thank you
I
very
figured you
much.
would be. Go.
And thanks to everyone. This one is actually about a Boston player, 1958. It's about a great pinch hitter named Carroll Hardy. He was hitting for the Cleveland Indians and pinch hit for Roger Maris. And he had a game-winning 3-run home run. Now, that's a wonderful story by itself, but the interesting part is in the years later, he played for the Boston Red Sox, and to my knowledge, became the only player ever to pinch hit for Ted Williams and Kyle Yastrzemski. That's a little bit about baseball.
Tell me how we get that newsletter.
You get it by sending me an email at jneross, J-and-A-N-D-E, ross@gmail.com.
There you go. Joe will give you all the particulars of that there. Alec, again, go.
How did he do when he pinch hit for Ted Williams and Yastrzemski?
I don't think that matters. The fact that he would pinch hit for those two guys is enough of a story.
Hey, you know, I'll take it. If you are local to us and you are in New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, and whatnot, this Sunday, we are meeting at Delta Dental Stadium in beautiful downtown Manchester, New Hampshire, tongue firmly in cheek, for the first of 2 Fisher Cats games this year. We're going to meet at the box office at about 11:45. We're going to be bringing in our stuff, our table, our book giveaways and whatnot. And we're going to meet the fans. We'll be hanging out, talking some baseball, talking about what we're researching, things like that. And generally meeting, enjoying a game, enjoying each other, and finally having our first in-person meeting of 2026. If you want to go to that game, send me an email directly. Everybody knows how to find me. My email is in the Sabre directory. It is bruce@brucemcclurenh.com, and I'll get you on the list. Now, after that, Monday, June 22nd, the East Coast Cooperative will host Sabre member Christopher Dale to discuss his book, Kid Gloves, How Baseball Helps Children Overcome 21st Century Problems. We're in the 21st century. This meeting is hosted by the Elysian Fields Chapter President Donna Muscarella and will start at 7 p.m. Eastern. The registration link is at the Sabre events calendar. Okay, here we go. On to our feature presentation. Celebrated as a democratic space for all Americans, the Major League Ballpark, in fact, privileges the middle and upper class white male fan while tactically marginalizes poor urban residents and people of color. Tonight's book examines the game's economically and socially stratified system, reflected changing understandings of urban space inclusion and the body politic. Sabre member Seth Tannenbaum is an assistant professor of sports studies at Manhattanville University, where he teaches classes including baseball and American society, spectators and fans, urban sport, and American sport history. He earned a PhD in American history at Temple University, and he is here tonight to discuss his new book, Bleacher Seats and Luxury Suites, Democracy and Division at the 20th Century Ballpark. Seth Tannenbaum, welcome to Northern New England, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for that tremendous introduction. I really appreciate it.
It's all yours. Go get them.
All righty. Well, I'm going to do the thing where I say I am now going to share my screen because I have learned it is impossible to share your screen without saying I am now going to share my screen. Alrighty, so you should all hopefully see that up on your screen. Excellent. Thank you so much. Again, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be with you. As Bruce said, I earned my PhD in history at Temple University. I'm an assistant professor of sports studies at Manhattanville University, at least until the end of June, when I become an associate professor of sports studies at Manhattanville University. And Manhattanville is in Westchester County, New York. It's about 45 minutes north of New York City. I do not actually remember when I got my own Sabre membership. I think it must have been when I was in graduate school. But growing up, my dad was a Sabre member, so there were always Sabre research journals lying around the house and on the coffee table and stuff like that. So it's been in, the ether for some time. In graduate school, I took classes on consumer culture history and food history, and I started to think about where they met. And I realized that they intersected, for me at least, with hot dogs at ballparks. So I actually started this whole thing writing about ballpark food concessions. And I presented a paper on that, because Cassidy's in the house, I'm going to say this, in Cooperstown at the symposium in, I think, 2014. And that was sort of the origin of this. And from there, I expanded out to look at the full experience and to write this book. So I'm going to, for about 35 minutes, I'm going to read some excerpts from the book, and then I will take questions very happily. So, there we go. With 2 outs in the top of the 5th inning of a Wednesday, April 29th, 2015 game between the Baltimore Orioles and the visiting Chicago White Sox, White Sox batter Micah Johnson grounded the ball to Orioles second baseman Ray Navarro, who fielded it and threw it to first baseman Chris Davis for a force out. Davis, as first basemen often do at the end of an inning, casually tossed the ball into the stands. On this occasion, however, Davis did not bother to pick out a particular fan for the souvenir, because on that day, 5 years before the COVID-19 pandemic made such situations shockingly normal, there were no fans in the ballpark. 17 days earlier, Baltimore police had arrested 25-year-old Freddie Gray on spurious charges. The previously healthy Gray emerged from a 45-minute ride in the back of a police van, a ride in which he was shackled but not permitted to use a seatbelt, in a coma and with severe spinal damage. Gray never regained consciousness and died a week later. Baltimore residents, angered by years of racist policing, demanded justice. On Saturday, April 25th, activists marched and rallied outside Baltimore City Hall. City police monitored their activities closely, but without an overwhelming presence of uniformed officers. Following the rally, the marchers headed downtown. Their path took them directly past Oriole Park at Camden Yards, the Orioles' home ballpark that, when it opened in 1992, was a trend-setting facility, in part because, unlike its predecessors, it was situated adjacent to downtown. As the activists neared the park, large numbers of uniformed officers materialized to prevent them from getting close to it, leading one protester to yell that the police, quote, only care about the Orioles. When the marchers continued on their path, they encountered baseball fans, many of whom were there to root on the Orioles' opponents, the Boston Red Sox. As they had all along their route, outside the bars surrounding Camden Yards, the protesters chanted justice for Freddie Gray. Drunken Red Sox fans, presumably few of whom lived in Baltimore, chanted back, we don't care. The crowds mixed and fights broke out, including one between a heavy-set white man in his 50s wearing a National Police Week jacket and a black man with long braids wearing an Orioles jacket. Photographs showed overwhelmingly white bar patrons and overwhelmingly black protesters, demonstrating a stark contrast between the people who lived in the city and those who came into it to drink and to be entertained by the national pastime. A journalist later explained that in the ensuing hours, quote, some teenagers and young men smashed in police cruisers' windshields and bar windows and looted a 7-Eleven. Throughout the game, police helicopters circled near the ballpark. With the score tied at 4 in the 9th inning, and in order to protect some of the very same fans who had instigated the fights that preceded the property damage, the mayor and the city police ordered the 36,757 fans at the game to remain in Camden Yards. Photographs of fans standing inside locked ballpark gates show a predominantly white crowd. As journalist Dave Zirin wrote, if fans had been permitted to exit at that time, they would have had to confront the reality that a young man who did not look all that different from some of the people they were cheering on the field was killed a short Uber ride away. By the time the Orioles won the game in the bottom of the 10th on a walk-off home run, the city had lifted the order and allowed fans to leave, but told them to avoid Howard Street north of the ballpark and Harbor Place to its east. Soon thereafter, the team offered free tickets to anyone who had been in the park that night because, as they explained, those fans, quote, may not have had the premier Oriole Park experience that we strive to achieve. The following afternoon's game went off without a hitch, but in the wake of Gray's funeral on Monday morning, some grieving Baltimoreans again turned to property destruction. The Chicago White Sox were scheduled to make their only visit to Baltimore to play a 3-game series starting that evening. With police stationed around the ballpark, the light rail shut down north of the park, and only 2 of the park's gates open, a little more than 45 minutes before the 7 o'clock first pitch, Major League Baseball postponed the game. Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred explained that, quote, we feel like we made the decision that will provide us with the greatest possible security in terms of protecting the fans, the players, the umpires, everybody involved in the game. Late Tuesday morning, the Orioles announced that that night's game was also postponed. Wednesday's game would be played at 2 instead of 7 to ensure they would over before the city's 10 p.m. curfew. And no fans would be permitted to attend. Manfred explained that, quote, all of the decisions in Baltimore were driven first by the desire to ensure the safety of fans, players, umpires, and stadium workers. The Orioles manager made the point even clearer, noting that, quote, the last thing you want to do is put the fans in harm's way. The team announced that the postponed games from Monday and Tuesday would be made up as a doubleheader in late May, and that the Tampa Bay Rays, who were scheduled to come to Baltimore for a 3-game series starting Friday, would instead host the Orioles at their ballpark in Florida. Understanding why the Orioles hosted a game in an empty ballpark requires looking much further back than early April 2015. Tracing the history of the fan experience at MLB ballparks shows that while throughout the 20th century, the ballpark was often described as an egalitarian place, the experience there was built on exclusion and division. The nature of this exclusion and division changed over the century, becoming more covert in some ways and more visible in others, as social norms, cities, and leisure consumption patterns changed. Consistently, however, the fan experienced privileged middle and upper class white men by centering their experience and the vision of America it represented around their needs, desires, and perspectives, and making sure they felt safe and secure at the ballpark. Middle and upper class white men made up the majority of people in the ballpark during the 20th century, and to many of them, the experience there felt inclusive and egalitarian. At games, fans passed hot dogs to strangers in the middle of a row of seats. They stood up collectively so someone could dash to the restroom between innings, and they rooted for the home team together with people they did not know. Although these actions had nothing to do with voting or governance, because they made people feel like equal members of a community that was not explicitly restricted by race, class, or gender, many fans saw them as democratic acts. What fans saw and did at the ballpark tells an important story, not just about how fans thought about the ballpark experience in urban spaces, but also how they felt about the nation as a whole. Bleacher seats and luxury suites is a history of the changes in the in-person MLB fan experience that explains why and when those changes happened and what they tell us about broader society and about people's hopes, fears, tastes, and prejudices. It examines the fan experience primarily through 5 important and trend-setting ballparks, which shaped and reflected the experience at other facilities. Those ballparks are the Polo Grounds and Yankee Stadium in the first half of the 20th century, or the classic ballpark era, Dodger Stadium and the Astrodome from the 1950s through the 1980s, the multi-use ballpark era, and Camden Yards in the retro chic ballpark era, the 1990s and beyond. Although the venues I discuss hosted a plethora of events, I focus on baseball because they meant different things to people attending different events, and because of the widespread rhetoric about baseball and its place in American society. The Polo Grounds, which in its 4 iterations was primarily home to the National League's New York Giants, reflects many of the classic ballpark era's trends, including that it was located in a mass transit accessible part of the city. At the Polo grounds, the Giants owners and concessionaire Harry M. Stevens helped establish the framework of the in-person fan experience that remained relatively constant throughout the 20th century. That experience was one in which fans were surrounded by strangers who joined together to eat hot dogs and root for the home team. As Stevens once claimed, quote, "At the counters in the rear of the Polo grounds, you would find a prominent banker eating a Frankfurter and drinking a glass of beer, and beside him would be a truck driver doing precisely the same thing." The park had the image of an inclusive and egalitarian all-American space, but working-class fans, women, and people of color were not present in large numbers, and the Giants treated them as inferior to their white male fans when they even were in the park. Yankee Stadium, which opened not far from the Polo grounds in 1923, was the first major league ballpark to be named a stadium. And until the 1990s, nearly all subsequent parks were also called stadiums. By the time Yankee Stadium opened, it was easier for working-class fans to attend games. In response, Jacob Ruppert, the team's owner, built Yankee Stadium with 3 tiers, which gave middle and upper-class fans more distance from lower-class ones and allowed him to earn larger profits. Those tiers also helped the team to draw white fans who did not want to sit near fans of color, at the same time as black fans from nearby Harlem. At least when black fans were not protesting the team because a Yankees outfielder claimed he stayed in shape in the offseason by committing acts of police brutality against black people. When new Yankees owner Larry MacPhail took over in 1945, he made it easier for working-class fans to attend more often by installing lights and playing night games at the house that Ruth built, but also gave the team's wealthiest fans the option of more distance from its poorest ones by creating a private club underneath the stands for field box seat ticket holders. After struggling to draw fans across the East River from Yankee Stadium at Ebbets Field, Dodger owner Walter O'Malley moved the team to Los Angeles in 1958, where he built a suburban accessible baseball paradise with 5 tiers, 16,000 parking spots, and private clubs to give fans the option of exclusion while maintaining the facade of inclusion that kept them coming to the park. Although the Dodgers drew black and white fans from their first season in Los Angeles, the team struggled to connect with Los Angeles' large Mexican-American community until Fernando Valenzuela burst onto the scene in the early 1980s. Regardless of who was at the park, because fans arrived in private automobiles as opposed to on mass transit, parked in lots exclusively designated for fans who had tickets near theirs instead of mingling on the streets, and were unable to move between different tiers of the ballpark once inside, Dodger Stadium functioned a lot like a suburban gated community. Different groups of people were in the same physical space, but rarely, if ever, interacted with one another. Additionally, Dodger Stadium's promotional material focused on drawing women to the park, not because they were fans of the game, but because it was supposedly clean and modern enough to make it a family-friendly atmosphere. Women were regulars at Dodger Stadium, but marked as different and inferior to men there just the same. In the 1960s, Astros owner Roy Hoffines convinced the National League to expand to Houston with the promise of a futuristic, suburban-style domed stadium located in a car-accessible part of the city's periphery. To get the National League to agree to give him a team, however, Hoffines had to promise that the dome would be desegregated and leverage that promise to gain support from black Houstonians in the bond elections that funded the facility's construction. At the same time, black Houstonians were conducting sit-in campaigns and otherwise pushing Houston's public accommodations to desegregate. Activists formed somewhat strange bedfellows with Hoffines and his fledgling baseball team. But for a while, their interests aligned, and a non-segregated dome stadium, the first of its kind, opened in Houston in 1965. Despite the Astrodome's air conditioning, cushioned seats, and promise to provide luxury for all, it was a more divided and exclusive ballpark than anything that had come before it. The dome had 7 tiers, including the first modern skyboxes hidden away at the very top of the stadium for the wealthiest of wealthy fans. Much like Disneyland, if you did not have a car, you could not easily get there. And Hofheinz, despite his commitment to formally desegregating his facility and public accommodations across the city, did not think of the team's white fans and fans of color in the same way. Indeed, it seems that despite claiming the only color he cared about was green, as in money, Hofheinz put much more thought into attracting service employees of color than fans of color, especially in the most elite parts of the dome. In many ways, consciously different from places like the Astrodome, Camden Yards, which opened in 1992, set the stage for the fan experience in the retro chic era. It was a downtown ballpark designed to flow seamlessly into the city and to make fans think of the game's past. It renewed the sentiment of inclusion that proliferated at classic era parks merely by being in such close proximity to downtown Baltimore, but maintained the exclusivity that made supposedly public spaces a draw. Camden Yards did so by offering all the exclusive spaces that stadiums like the Astrodome had, and even fewer cheap seats than most multi-use era parks. To make it more of a draw to the team's predominantly white fan base, Camden Yards was also significantly more separated from Baltimore's black neighborhoods than the team's previous home had been. Although phenomenally successful at attracting middle and upper class white people, the percentage of black fans at Orioles games at Camden Yards was consistently about 1/10 of the percentage of black residents of Baltimore's total population. Bleacher Seats and Luxury Suites closes with a brief exploration of Truist Park in Cobb County, a suburb of Atlanta, where the Braves relocated in 2017. The team left a mass transit accessible urban ballpark that had opened in 1997 for what is essentially a car accessible only ballpark, and explained its move with a host of racially coded language, essentially arguing that more white fans would come to their new park because it was further from where black Atlantans lived. Even as both changed, ballparks and the baseball played in them often seemed timeless to fans. Crowd descriptions also offered an element of timelessness, though teams frequently remodeled and rebuilt their ballparks. Across the 20th century, observers regularly framed the crowd as a diverse representation of America, implying that fans were equal members of a larger community and that the ballpark was equally accessible to all, although that was never truly the case for women, people of color, and poorer fans. For example, in 1909, progressive reformer Jane Addams saw fans at the park as, quote, lifted out of their individual affairs and so fused together that a man cannot tell whether it is his own coat or another's that he is wildly waving to celebrate a victory. Adams concluded that the fan, quote, does not call the stranger who sits next to him his brother, but he unconsciously embraces him in an overwhelming outburst of kindly feeling when the favorite player makes a home run. Though she referred to fans as male, she asked, quote, does not this contain a suggestion of the undoubted power of public recreation to bring together all classes of a community in the modern city? Similarly, in 1911, a writer for Baseball magazine argued that the fan, quote, is the representative American institution. His ranks are filled from every class of society by every one of the many nationalities which combine to make the American nation. The next year, journalist Hugh Fullerton called baseball, quote, the most democratic sport in the world, and in the stand and bleachers, all are equal during a hard game. Again, emphasizing the seeming equality of male fans. In 1935, Meyer Berger wrote in the New York Times that, quote, at the height of his frenzy, the rooter knows no class distinction. The taxi driver or garbage handler will sock the banker or broker in fraternal enthusiasm when the home team slugger belts one over the wall. The meek, inhibited bookkeeper rises to rare altitudes of scorn and vituperation in arguing the fine points of the game with the stiffish tycoon in the adjoining seat, and the unemployed dishwasher from the Bronx sounds his native note of derision when the Park Avenue penthouse dweller on his left doesn't happen to share his views in matters pertaining to baseball. In the ballpark, every man's a king. In 1988, author Peter Golenbach wrote, "Black, white, Christian, Jew, Hindu, Muslim, gay or straight, pro-abortion, pro-life, the disparate interest groups agree on little except for their love of the national pastime." Despite observers' assertions that baseball was inclusive and created a sense of community that many found to be democratic, by design, the ballpark was never a space where all fans were equal. In 1908, Rollin Hart wrote in The Atlantic that, quote, "Arriving at the gates, fans undergo a self-imposed classification. The frivolous, the detached, the shallow, fabricators of society verse, let us say, purchase tickets for the grandstands. Those a shade or two less artificial prefer the 50-cent bleachers. But the true runic singers, they of the flaming hard and awesome howl, humble themselves to be bleached for a quarter." Moreover, when Sunday baseball was illegal and all games were day games, as was the case in many northeastern cities into the 1920s and beyond, few working-class fans could go to the park because they were at work when games happened. In the 1960s, owners like Walter O'Malley of the Dodgers and Roy Hoffines of the Astros introduced even more ways to separate fans, adding physical tiers and new ticket price levels to their ballparks. They also pioneered exclusive clubs that gave wealthy fans the option to further separate themselves from everyone else. By the 1990s, one fan felt that the common man was left out of the ballpark because, quote, "we can't get tickets or won't go because we don't feel welcome." Like that fan in the 1990s, other observers increasingly commented on inequalities in the ballpark experience. In 1997, journalist Frank DeFord argued that, quote, "not even a cynic could ever deny the essential democracy that was always the most magical and defensible element of popular sport. The arena made for a grand public convocation, a 20th century village green where we could all come together in common excitement. Of the most recent vintage, though, luxury boxes, often as not enclosed behind glass, have so insulated the swells from the hoi polloi that it is fair to say that the American Sports Palace has come to boast the most stratified seating arrangement in entertainment." While some scholars have noted the inequalities in retro-chic ballparks, because they did not fully examine how difficult it was for many poorer fans and fans of color to get to multi-use era stadiums, which were designed for cars, not mass transit, they have suggested that ballparks in the 1960s and 1970s were relatively accessible and egalitarian spaces. What those scholars saw as decreased egalitarianism in the retro-chic era was as much an increase in the visibility of the barriers to full access to the fan experience that had always existed as it was to anything else. In other words, to many white male fans, the demographic of people most often, but not exclusively, making claims about the inclusive nature of the fan experience, ballparks of the 1990s and 2000s felt less egalitarian because the barriers and segmentation that had not impacted them in previous eras were modified to become more visible and have an impact on their experience. As journalist Michael Farber acknowledged when he wrote that, quote, "the infernal skybox creates a gap more dispiriting than box seats ever did. It's not that the barriers were new. It's that they were easier to see." The contrast between a space that was reputedly open to all and where all were treated as equals and its reality as one that team officials carefully set up to give some fans the option of distinction and separation and reaffirm existing social hierarchies was a fundamental aspect of the ballpark experience. Moreover, the gap between baseball's reputation for democracy and its reality of division and exclusion mirrored other spaces where Americans gathered to practice everyday democratic rituals as well. Bleacher seats and luxury suites shows that at baseball games, exclusion, both from the ballpark entirely and from the totality of the fan experience, was masked by rhetoric about the crowd and the relative lack of explicit policies barring anyone from attending. Instead, team executives built a system that was economically and socially stratified and, over the course of the 20th century, increasingly physically distant from people of color and poorer Americans. Throughout, women were marginalized at the park and as fans. Moreover, Ballpark's physical tiers allowed wealthier fans to pay more to sit where they would not have to interact with poorer fans. That type of division gave middle and upper class fans a space that felt comfortable and safe because it was anything but equally accessible to all Americans. Yet importantly, retained the appearance of inclusivity because the barriers to attendance were covert. Places like ballparks that were supposedly open to everyone, but due to cost, location, and a lack of welcoming atmosphere for some Americans were not truly open to all, allowed the patrons who could more easily access them to conceive of a nation composed almost exclusively of people like themselves. As fans internalized the rhetoric that cast ballparks as sites representing the totality of America, saw mostly middle and upper class white men when they looked around them, and read descriptions of female fans presenting them as inferior and different, they were likely to center middle and upper class white men in their understanding of the nation. Even as cities in the country changed dramatically in the 20th century, ballparks reified the privileged position of middle and upper class white men as the normative American citizen, marginalizing other Americans. To continue to attract middle and upper class white male fans, teams had to change their ballparks' images and tinker with how fans could access them and how they were divided inside them when fans' tastes and their visions of what a city should look and feel like changed. As fans' impressions of cities shifted, team officials modified ballparks' designs to maintain the feeling of inclusion built on structural discrimination that was fundamental to the fan experience. Although owners always employed different ticket prices for different areas of the park and often separated those sections with metal railings, as barriers that made it harder for working class fans to attend lessened and cities began to feel out of control to many middle and upper class white people, owners added more physical and financial divisions at the park. From the 2 main tiers at the Polo grounds to the 3 at Yankee Stadium and the 5 at Dodger Stadium and the 7 at the Astrodome. The more fans could afford to pay, the more distance from the masses they could choose to purchase. Those tiers helped owners achieve their main goal as capitalists, attracting larger and larger crowds to bolster their profits. The physical divisions gave fans the option to sit in sections of the ballpark where the majority of people would act in accordance with or be accepting of behaviors stereotypically associated with certain socioeconomic classes. Tiers allowed owners to create a mass audience of people who had contrasting views of what a day at the ballpark should entail and diffused tensions between groups by shielding one from another. Bias, prejudice, and structural discrimination, however, complicated owners' quests to increase attendance and maximize profits. Racism, sexism, and classism made it more difficult for some people to obtain the knowledge necessary to follow every pitch, exhibit great understanding of the game, and therefore be a traditional fan. It was not impossible for women, people of color, and members of the working class to become traditional baseball fans, but there were barriers, including the way they were described and the hurdles they faced to playing the game as children, that made it more difficult for people from marginalized communities to become incorporated into traditional fandom. For team executives, one of the consequences of those barriers was that they could not satisfy their cravings for increased revenue only through appeals to traditional fans. Moreover, keeping marginalized communities out of traditional fandom appealed to many traditional fans. Therefore, owners aimed to appeal to people interested in other types of entertainment, to attract more fans, while trying not to undermine the social hierarchy of traditional fandom. To draw those people and attract more money from their wealthiest fans, team executives created exclusive luxury suites, restaurants, and clubs that, as they proliferated, also served as visible symbols that most people did not have full access to the totality of the fan experience. In other words, the very structures that privileged middle and upper class white male fans eventually meant that more visible barriers in the fan experience were necessary for team executives to reap the profits they demanded. Although tiers and restricted access sections allowed owners to make more money and protected fans from one another, to provide fans the sense of safety they desired, owners also had to shift the location of their facilities and alter the barriers that made it harder for some people to attend games. In the first quarter of the 20th century, owners built ballparks on the edges of cities where they could afford land, but also where mass transit line ran so that carless fans, the vast majority in this era, could easily reach them. As the decades progressed, the areas around many of these ballparks developed into middle-class neighborhoods, often populated by the very fans who frequented games. Owners did not need to protect fans from the city in the first half of the 20th century because many fans were the same people who lived there, and structural barriers limited the number of working-class people who could attend games. Additionally, many ballparks physically separated fans who bought the cheapest tickets from everyone else. Moreover, the way that female fans, working-class fans, and fans of color were written about presented them as inferior to the middle and upper-class white men who composed the majority of fans in the park. As white flight and suburbanization changed the demographics of cities after World War II, the neighborhoods around a number of ballparks became poorer and less white. Many of the middle and upper-class white fans who frequented baseball games no longer lived near ballparks. Instead, they lived in the suburbs, where they relied on automobiles for transportation. At the same time, however, overt racism and classism were increasingly socially unacceptable. So owners aimed to give fans the feeling of safety they wanted by having them drive to games and park in well-lit parking lots around new modernist stadiums, often in different cities altogether, rather than explicitly bar anyone. The structural discrimination at those new post-war ballparks worked similarly to how it did in the suburbs, including inaccessibility via mass transit. The increase in physical tiers at multi-use era stadiums created new financial barriers to full access to the fan experience that functionally recreated racial and class segregation and reinforced a similar notion of who was fully welcomed as the one that existed at classic era ballparks. Suburban-style ballparks, however, lost their luster in the eyes of many by the 1990s. To many, baseball had lost its timelessness and needed to return to its urban past and its architectural roots. Much as they had when classic-era ballparks were in vogue, fans did not actually want to patronize spaces that were open to everyone. They only wanted to go to ballparks that felt open to everyone. Starting in the 1990s, owners built new ballparks with municipal assistance in carefully controlled, highly regulated urban spaces. Those ballparks presented a facsimile of the past in an atmosphere that was effectively walled off from the parts of the city that middle and upper-class white fans wanted to avoid. The greater number of skyboxes and reduced total of cheap seats at those facilities were more visible barriers to the full experience than many older ballparks had, but served to reproduce the crowd demographics of older ballparks just the same. Regardless, throughout the 20th century, the fan experience was an important part of American society. Where that experience took place, who was involved, how fans got there, where they sat when they arrived, and how they behaved tells us that middle and upper class white Americans wanted to spend their free time in spaces that felt inclusive, but were far from open to everyone. The fan experience, however, was designed not to remind middle and upper class white Americans that they had paid to be separated from others. Instead, that separation was made to feel natural. At ballparks, therefore, middle and upper class white Americans were not prompted to think about the limits of American democracy, making it harder for them to see those limits in other places as well. Thank you.
There's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, a lot that I've really never thought about. I'm one, and my wife, who is here tonight under her pseudonym Gus the Sabercat, will back me up on this, that I we gravitate more toward the minor league parks as opposed to major league stadiums. And on the screen now, you can see how to buy the book. If you have your phone handy, hit that QR code. There is a 30% savings for you, which is nice. I feel as though the minor league parks don't have that separation, at least not as wide. There's luxury boxes. Do you think, Seth, that now that what is it called, Diamond Baseball Holdings, something like that, is he's shaking his head already. I think he knows where I'm going with it. Now that they're buying up a lot of these clubs, like the two in my geographic area, do you think you're going to start to see that separation in minor league ball, or are they constrained by the existing parks?
Well, they're only constrained by the existing parks as long as municipalities don't just give them hundreds of millions of dollars to build new ones. So I'm not super optimistic about that. Like, the pattern is we keep giving billionaire team owners millions of dollars to, to do this, to build new ballparks. So I do think there will be, to an extent, an increase in that division. Although there's also a way of looking at it in which the division isn't always as necessary in many places where there are minor league ballparks, because those cities and towns tend to be less diverse, so that separation isn't as necessary if the demographics are full of very similar people. Then that desire to be separated from people who are different from you doesn't really come into play in the same way if everyone is very similar to you.
Interesting point. I would offer that I worked in minor league ball for years, and granted, the team that I worked for, they moved. I worked for the old New Britain Rockcats in New Britain, Connecticut. They are now the Hartford Yard Goats. You want to see a diverse crowd? As far as I'm concerned, Hartford's a diverse crowd.
Right. Yeah.
But it's all, that ballpark was built all one level.
Yeah.
So you really can't separate people unless you start separating people by section based on price. And then, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, Hartford is definitely a different, I think Hartford is rarer amongst minor league towns.
Ooh, interesting. Okay.
In that it is, like, I'm thinking about, I'm a Phillies fan. I'm thinking of Reading. I'm thinking of Allentown. I'm thinking of, Jersey Shore. I'm thinking of Clearwater, right? So yeah, I don't write about the minor league ballparks in this book. So
sure. Yep.
I don't have a comprehensive, right? I'm sort of more off the gut than off of the academic. Sure. But I do see that there is absolutely more possibility for interaction in these smaller parks because, as you said, they're smaller. They're often one level. The concourse is the concourse. The concession stand is the concession stand, right? There's no way to jump that line.
This is really, really interesting, fascinating research and data that I can't recall as ever having been collated before by anybody in SABR. I might be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I hope somebody's going to email me to tell me I'm wrong. But this is really interesting stuff. I'll tell you, heavy and high level too. If you have a question tonight for our presenter, Seth Tannenbaum, get in line just like everybody else has already raised their hand. Go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the react button. You'll see another button marked raise hand. Raise your hand. We'll get you in line to ask questions of Seth tonight. Alex Stace, you're up. Go.
Very good presentation. Two observations. One is I think baseball is still much less expensive to go to than NBA, NHL, or football games. So it's 3 to 4 times as much to go to any other major league sport. So I'm not talking so much about stratification, but just the average person being able to go. And then a question for the group. If we got rid of business class and United Airlines wanted to get the same revenue and we had everyone's fare went up by 35% because 10% of the people pay 4 times what other people do, would people on this call rather have the United Airlines egalitarian experience, or would they rather have the experience that they have now when people are sitting right next to each other with different levels of service? Just a thought experiment.
So I'll answer the first question. And yeah, I mean, there are some structural reasons why baseball is cheaper than NBA games. They play twice as many games and they have twice as many seats, right? It's still the same total revenue if you charge half as much, right? And they play fewer games in the NFL, right? But what you're getting into, I think, with the second question is this idea of dynamic pricing. And major league owners are getting better and better and better at charging people the maximum amount they're willing to pay, even if the person sitting next to you has paid a different amount, right? They've figured out how to do this, which games are on demand. They're, for lack of a better word, skimming off the secondary market as well. And that all factors into, I think, what you're talking about with that other thought experiment of dynamic pricing, right? That this is something that is not just happening in baseball, that it is happening in any economic interaction that basically anyone is having in today's age.
Well, and it relates to baseball streaming and basketball streaming versus over-the-air television, right? And that they're trying to come up with these different packages for television rights that enables people to price discriminate across people that want to subscribe to various services as opposed to getting the over-the-air, the old style rabbit ears, baseball telecast. The difference is that you can't dynamically price like a 10-year Netflix contract very easily relative to, the incremental demand of an individual game or package.
Yeah, and that is different. But one of the things that team owners don't really care about is pricing you out of the ballpark if you're then going to buy the TV package. They're totally fine if you choose, right? If you had, what does MLB TV cost now? $160 a year, $180 a year, whatever it is. If that was the money you were going to spend on buying tickets, they don't care if you use that money to buy MLB TV. It doesn't matter to them, right? Then they've got more seats they can sell to somebody else. And it's all part of that process as well.
This is interesting stuff. I'll tell you what. Next up is the editor of the 11th Street Eagle. The great Craig Gerritsen is here. Craig, how you doing?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, man. Go.
Hey, I just wanted to ask about, you alluded to it a little bit, but about segregation in ballparks. I don't know if there are any ballparks that did not admit Black people. I think most stadiums would have a section where Black people were allowed. I know Clark Griffith in Washington, D.C., there was one section, and he said that they wanted to sit there. And that's why that whole area was just for Black patrons. So I'm just wondering, when did that end, and how did it end?
Yeah, so St. Louis was the only major league ballpark with a strict formal segregation policy. Black fans could only sit in the outfield seats at Sportsman's Park for both Browns and Cardinals games. So that was the pavilion, which was covered, and the bleachers, which were uncovered. If a Black person was given a ticket to the grandstands, went to the turnstile, they were rejected and sent around to the outfield seats, regardless. And that policy, the earliest I've found that policy was 1920. And it lasted until 1944, and when after years of activists and fans pushing the teams to change the policy, and then eventually, it's in the middle of World War II, all of the rhetoric that is being used to justify the war, we're fighting for democracy, we're fighting for equality, all of that. And there's a municipally appointed interracial coalition that the mayor of St. Louis creates following a race riot in Detroit, where he's like, I don't want similar racial violence in St. Louis. He creates this commission, and that commission finally is able to push the owners of the Browns and the Cardinals to end the policy, and that's in 1944. In DC, as you mentioned, it's the idea that Black fans would choose just to sit in one section of the ballpark. You laughed as you said it because it's a laughable idea, right? That policy is really tricky for me to unpack. The sources aren't as good. I haven't done as much research into it as I wanted to, but it doesn't seem to be ironclad in the same way it was in St. Louis, where the ticket sellers it seems like we're told to only sell black fans tickets to the bleachers or to that one section. But at the turnstiles, if black fans showed up with a ticket, they would be admitted per their ticket. So that policy is a little less, to use a bad phrase, black and white.
Interesting.
Great. I know in Washington, they also used the stadium for Negro League games. I'm sure a lot of, I'm sure in Pittsburgh they did that too, and other places where, and I guess they were kind of selling to two audiences there, where you would, I would think when it was a Negro Leagues game, it would be an all black state or mostly black crowd, and they would sit wherever they wanted.
Yes. So in St. Louis in particular, right, for a long time, the Negro League teams couldn't rent Sportsman's Park. And then I think I've wrote a whole article about this, but it's just not front of mind right now. I think in 1941, there was a July 4th, 1941, a Negro League game. Satchel Paige was pitching at Sportsman's Park, and they dropped the segregated policy entirely because, Craig, as you suggested, right, if you can't have 95% of the audience sitting in the outfield seats. That's just weird.
Right.
And then immediately reinstated it for regular season games. And then at the end of the season, there was an interracial exhibition game, one of those Dizzy Dean touring exhibitions, in which they made half the ballpark for white fans and half the ballpark for black fans. And then when 1942 rolls around, they put the segregated policy right back in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Next up, oh boy, buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. It is Ryan Half a Can McClanahan, the fashion plate of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter. Ryan, go.
Hey, this is absolutely fascinating. I think I can only speak here to Washington, D.C., just based on what my grandmother had told me about that area in like 1942. She was stationed there. And I remember her saying that Griffith Stadium, around the stadium, was kind of like an unsafe area, even back then. And this kind of gets me to asking the question about separation of, I guess, either classes or African Americans versus white people. And I wonder if that was based on perceived safety, because again, the area was not very safe, and there was a number of race riots back then. Also, a number of years ago, there was a pretty good article in the SABR magazine about Landis and his issues with race.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what do you make of that?
Yeah, so I think at one point you said perceived safety, and I think that's really important. We don't have perfect, great crime rates, but it's the perception of safety or the perception of unsafety that is really driving a lot of the movement of ballparks. Regardless of the reality or how the numbers get parsed, it's that perception that really matters. And Griffith Stadium was in an increasingly black neighborhood. It's right next to Howard University, right? One of the earliest HBCUs in the country, in a neighborhood that, because of residential segregation, is becoming increasingly black because it's one of the only places in DC where black people are allowed to buy homes. So as that's happening, and as people are moving into DC during the war who aren't from that area, maybe you don't have experience interacting with people who look different from themselves, that can be a disquieting experience. That can make people perceive it as unsafe, even if that isn't necessarily statistically an accurate statement. But that perception can really influence that behavior. And you also talked, you started off with talking a little bit about class and race. And because of the discrimination in housing and the discrimination in employment, right? Increasingly, especially in urban areas, working class people are people of color because they don't have access to those same opportunities. So by saying, oh, we're moving away from the poorer people because of the structure of the American economy, because of the structure of the American housing market, it also means you're moving away from people of color.
Yeah, and so in Anacostia there was a fairly large naval I guess there's a naval base there
Yeah.
as well. So you did have a lot of when you're in the military, you've got all walks of life going
Yeah.
through the military, and so that's I guess that's what was happening back in the early 1940s, and I can only speak to that.
Yeah.
Again, the article is quite good. Also, the fact that I believe Griffith, I think it was Griffith, said that he wanted to sign what's his name, Josh Gibson, but the fans were the issue and not necessarily the owners, because really, I mean, at the end of the day, these guys just wanted to make money, and it was largely the fans. And you did have race riots back then, mostly in the North too. I mean, I could go on and on about this, but this
Yeah.
was actually fantastic. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, in the 1940s, I will say that the military was pretty strictly segregated. So there wasn't really very much racial interaction in the military at that point. And I've learned from my research that Griffith or any other owner, right, when they say what they're thinking about is the fans, what they really mean is they're thinking about themselves.
Yeah.
And that's as close as I'll come to connecting those dots. Although Griffith did say point blank at one point, or his nephew who owned the team later, I don't know which Griffith you're talking about, but I'm talking about the one who moved to Minnesota, did say openly that he moved to Minnesota because there were only 15,000 black people in the state of Minnesota.
Yeah.
So
We've come a long way in 80, 90 years. So,
Yep.
you know,
That was, I believe, 1977 or 78 when Clark said that. It was at a like a Rotarian meeting or something.
It was a
like
Lions
that.
Club.
It was a Lions Club meeting. That's right. It was a Lions Club meeting.
Yeah.
And do I recall somebody had a recorder, or was it the press was there by chance and took copious notes? But,
I don't remember the details, but the funnier one is before he moved, they were having the American League meetings at some hotel, and a reporter crawled into the air vent and eavesdropped on the American League meetings, in which Griffith, before he even moved, basically said, there are too many black people in DC, right? The trend is getting too black. So this wasn't an idea that he created afterwards. I just love the idea of a journalist crawling through an air vent to overhear some owners talk about stuff.
That's what that Lions Club meeting utterance, for lack of a better word, was what honked off Rod Carew enough to say toodaloo.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting that he has reconciled with the club for the most part and has been making appearances. He was with us in Sabre in Minneapolis a couple of years ago. So interesting how that has
absolutely
repaired itself. Tony Brown, how in the world are you?
Good. Thank you so much for this. It's really amazing, especially just to hear it all in one space and connecting all of these ideas. I have a bit of a question, I guess. What do you think like the future is of the sports stadium with like the involvement of private equity getting into ownership? And I'm also thinking of like with newer stadiums like the new Yankee Stadium with the the premium seating, Legends Club right behind home plate. They're empty a lot of the time. And because people are inside, not even out watching the game. And so I find that fascinating that it's like it's almost like an extreme separation of class because they're not even showing face, especially if the weather's not not up to par, you know? And then I guess, did any of your research, do you think there's any sort of passivity in the American baseball fan with changes to sports stadiums, prices, things like that? And the only reason why I ask is I am a Red Sox fan and a Liverpool soccer fan. And so it's interesting to watch John Henry and see that the fans all got together and protested ticket increases and actually won a 3-year ticket freeze. So I was just wondering, like, what has your research led to about the American baseball fan in response? Are they active, passive? Are they up against like massive forces, wealthy forces out of their control? Yeah, and they get
Yeah. Thanks for that. So, first off, I need to preface this all with I'm trained as a historian, which means I know better than to try and predict the future. I'm not Nostradamus, so I'm not really gonna try and do that. Although I will say, I can read a trend and I can see an increase in uh, luxury of the luxury suites. Let me put it that way. And the empty seats when, as you mentioned, like when the weather's crummy, right? Those people are inside, but the team is still making the money, or they're not even, um, you know, coming to the ballpark, but the tickets are sold, so whatever, right? The team makes money on that. Um, so I think that division is probably going to stick around. I mean, really, what we're seeing a lot of right now is new ballparks and ballparks being reconstructed with like bar areas, like standing bar areas, to draw in people who just want to be there but not really have an interest in the game. Um, and that they pay their money spends just as good, so team owners don't really care about that. In terms of the passivity, I'm a Phillies fan. I did listen, I was watching the Phillies Red Sox series and I did hear a sell the team chant at Fenway Park. And that's more active than I think most baseball fans usually are. I don't think, certainly, baseball fans don't have the same feeling of ownership that European soccer fans tend to have. Aside from Brooklyn Dodger fans who still feel like that was their thing that was literally stolen from them. But for one thing, there isn't, European soccer, often the fans literally do own the team. It's like the Green Bay Packers. They literally do own the team. In the 1980s, I think, Ralph Nader organized a fan activist group. I can't remember what it's called. I think it still exists. It's really dormant. To try and rally fans to fight against cost increases and things like that. And here I'm totally editorializing, this is my view alone, like many things that Ralph Nader has tried to do, it was with great intentions and terrible execution. Aside from the seatbelt. Thank you for the seatbelt, Ralph. Appreciate that. That's really sort of what I would say. Like, yeah, they're not activists, Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Next up, not only does he have a baseball card and a column, but now he's got a question. It's Gus the Saber Cat. Go ahead, Gus.
Well, it's actually his mom.
Meow, meow.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
meow,
Mom.
meow, meow. First of all, Seth, thank you so much for this. It was
Thank you.
so enjoyable. And it was really, really a different way to look at things that I never thought about. So thank you. But yeah, as Bruce
Appreciate
said
that.
earlier, we really enjoy going to the minor leagues, and collegiate leagues too. And a lot of it is not just because of price point, but oftentimes most ballparks don't have food I can eat. Or if I do have to bring a cooler bag, I have to pay for more expensive seats in a restricted area that's peanut free in order to bring my cooler bag. And we've had that a couple times.
Yeah, that's really, really challenging, right? And not,
Yeah.
it's something that baseball should be doing more to make more accessible. If they want money from fans, they need to make it so that fans quite literally can be physically safe in the ballpark. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Fisher Cats has been great for us. You know, we've never had trouble with Fisher Cats. I've always been able to bring in my lunchbox, you know, whatever. They give me a medical tag, no questions asked. Last time we were there, they ran out of medical tags and they're like, yeah, we know you, just go through. Like,
Yeah. And that kind of experience is something that I think fans would have talked about having at Major League ballparks. I mean, not, with the peanut allergy, but like that being known by the people like 100 years ago.
yeah.
But, you know,
And
ballparks are so big and yeah.
It's not even a peanut allergy for me. I have celiac.
Yeah.
So like put in a salad stand. Like
Yeah.
Fisher Cats used to have an amazing salad bar and they got rid of it. But interesting, you can still get the salad bar when you're up in the boxes.
That is interesting. Yeah. And there are, I mean, they don't do it necessarily for people with celiacs. They do it for people who want to be gluten-free for other reasons as well. But Major League ballparks do often have like one gluten-free stand, but you have to know where it is and you have to like what they're serving and all these other things. And that really complicates the process and makes it not enjoyable. And the point of going to a baseball game is to enjoy yourself. Although my team often does what they can to make me not enjoy myself. The point is that I'm supposed to be able to enjoy myself.
Yes, exactly. But thank you again.
Thank you.
Dixie Tarango. What's going on, Dix?
Just fine. Alec, if you think going to a baseball game is cheaper than the other sports, you have never sat in my seats at Fenway. Now,
that's a choice that you make, I think. Fenway has artificial supply constraint and crazy fans, so it's not fully representative.
Well, I'm not a Red Sox fan. I'm a baseball fan. There's a difference. I have watched this program 3 times now, and I have watched it 3 times because the program is great. The visuals are terrific. And Seth wants you to learn something and tells you things that you would never, ever think of as a fan going to a simple thing like going to a baseball game. So that's why I've seen it 3 times. And I would be willing to bet that most of you, after sucking in everything tonight, would in 2 weeks like to see this again so you could get more into your head.
Thank you, Dixie. I appreciate that.
And that's why we record our meetings. Hey. This has been a really, really interesting discussion of Major League Baseball that you don't get anywhere else because you're focused on the history of the game and the players or what happened on the field today or whatever it might be. We never talk about the intentional or unintentional separation of classes of fans or even races of fans. And this book brings a lot to light that I know I never thought of sitting at any ballpark that I've ever been in. And I'm sure that most of us here on the call tonight can say the same thing. So Seth, kudos. This is really good stuff.
Thanks so much, Bruce. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure to have you in tonight. And you wound it up for our Zoom program this spring. So we're going on a little hiatus to recharge, enjoy some summer sun, and gather up some great new content for everybody. Our next Zoom will be Monday, September 14th at our new time of 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and give me another half hour so I can get some dinner in me, when we will have Harvey Saker. Harvey, if I blew that, I'm sorry. And his book, Before the Blue Jays, Professional Baseball in Toronto Prior to 1977. The sign-up link is available in the chapter meeting booklet and at the Sabre events calendar. And finally, If you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads when we come back in September. And if you're not yet a member, you know what to do. Join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community, offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom. SABR boasts more than 35 different research committees, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world, just like Seth Tannenbaum. For more information, go to saber.org today. Seth Tannenbaum, you're extraordinary. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you so much. And if you want more of me, I'm going to be on a Saber Eras team presentation on June 24th at, I believe, 8 o'clock Eastern time, where I'll be talking about some different stuff, actually. So check that out and vote for the Eras team.
Yes, that is in the Saber events calendar. If you want to see that, make sure you sign up for that today. So let's get everybody out of here. Seth, thanks again. I appreciate you. I hope I'll see you very soon. And we'll see everybody in September. Have a good night, everyone.